Welcome to Friday Night Readers. Fueled by coffee, we break down the books referenced on Gilmore Girls. Our little literary corner of the world helps you understand what the characters are talking so fast about and live in a world of books like Rory. Like short, read fast. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe to our Friday Night Readers newsletter community on Substack. You'll get instant access to a free printable list of 450 plus books on Gilmore Girls. Plus, even more Gilmore-inspired content, like our Rory Gilmore Reading Challenge, which we've been doing together since 2020. Paid members get exclusive extras. Come hang out where the real Gilmore magic happens. FridayNightReaders.substack.com. Hello, Friday Night Readers. Let's talk about one of the Gilmore Girls' favorite topics today, classic books. The prospect of reading more classic books is actually one of the reasons I started taking this challenge. Forgive me if you're hearing this for like the zillionth time, but it was during the pandemic and I realized there were so many older books that I wanted to read that I didn't for whatever reason, whether they just weren't assigned to me in school or even that they came out at a time when I was in school and not focused on reading new books. I thought this challenge was a really good way to make reading the classic books more fun and easier. And now we're in our 6th year. It continues to drive me. I have a classic book on my couch right now. And in preparing the list of classic books for you today, I realized how many of them I read because of this challenge. I think it's especially important today because classic book reading is down in schools for various reasons. Of course, there's AI, and also the teachers are required to teach for testing, and that does not often include classic books. This is from research I've done and also from talking to people. There have been some articles that even said that Ivy League students sometimes come to the school without ever having read a classic book, which is wild to me because in my school, which again, I'm right around Rory's age, we read 5 classic books each summer. And then we also read about 5 throughout the school year, so about 10 per year. So now I feel like I have an extra reason to continue promoting this challenge because I think that we can use the show to make reading classics important again for the youth. We all know there are so many benefits to reading classic books. First, they stand the test of time and they're very beautifully written. A lot of times we compare them with adaptations, which is also great. And these books really make you think. And sadly, critical thinking is decreasing right now. Another thing I want to note is that we are at the beginning of April right now, and I just think there's something about reading classic books in the spring. I think the writing is so often poetic that it feels like it mimics the season. For that reason, I will be focusing our conversation today on classic books that feel like spring. But first, let's talk about our featured book of the month. It's going to be The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton. This was the easiest and most obvious choice. I've run this challenge for 6 years now, and certain books just rise to the top with readers, and The Outsiders is absolutely at the top of that list. It is hands down the most popular choice with book club members. It's really up to you to say why. I have a poll in the Substack post that accompanies this podcast episode that asks why you most love The Outsiders, and some of the options I gave were because it's short and easy, it's iconic in pop culture, the story packs an emotional punch, it has relatable coming-of-age things. I may go with pop culture, kind of like the Gilmores. I guess I'm a Gilmore girl at heart. Second, I'd probably say short and easy. I think it's a book that when you look at it and you know it was set in high school and that it's short, it just doesn't feel intimidating. And it also seems like it could be interesting, whereas sometimes we know classic books can be a bit of a slog. So in this book, which is a coming-of-age novel, Ponyboy Curtis is a member of the working class greasers, and he becomes caught in a violent conflict with the wealthier Socs. You may recall that Lorelai called the Puffs Socs, and also that when Dean and Rory are going to Rory's dance, they refer to Ponyboy. I actually think this reference is pretty cute. They talk about the movie, and I feel like that totally tracks for Dean. He's always trying to do and say things that Rory will like, but though he may not have read the book, he did watch the movie. Anyway, after a tragic incident forces Ponyboy into hiding, he begins to see social divisions and gains a deeper understanding of loyalty, loss, and growing up. That's really a broad description. This is a really emotional story, and we see things like class conflict and violence. It's a very emotional high school drama where all of the tensions are really heightened, and these consequences are lasting, and they really change these characters' lives. You'll also see kids acting like adults. I remember thinking, where are the adults? For some reason, this tends to be popular in coming of age novels. I think it's really just so that the kids can have the center stage. The other thing I really want you to know about this book is that S.E. Hinton is actually a woman. They used S.E. sadly because they did not think that boys would buy a book like this written by a woman. And she also wrote it as a teen. I can't tell you how impressed I am by this because she weaves in things that are so astute and so smart. Like, for example, she talks about the Robert Frost poem, Nothing Gold Can Stay, and she sort of likens that poem about nature to childhood. It's just so impressive to me that someone so young could write something so meaningful and so long lasting. So if you haven't read it yet, that is the book that I will write a featured post about this month. And if you did read it, then the featured post will hopefully just bring you back to that time and that experience and give you new ways to think about the book. However, if you are looking for something different, we have a zillion more classic books for you to read. Now I'm going to focus on 10 that to me feel like spring. Again, I really think that classics and spring just go together. So I want to highlight books that will also give you that seasonal feel, just like Gilmore Girls. I'm taking these examples from a post I wrote last week about 10 classic books that feel as refreshing as spring. And it kind of worked out because I wish that I had made a podcast episode to go with that post. I just ran out of time. So now I can still talk about these books and more classic books with you. So my first classic spring choice is Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. And this book is one of the most referenced books on Gilmore Girls. You'll see it at least 10 times. One is the theme of Luke and Lorelai's wedding. And then because this book has so many unique characteristics, like the White Rabbit, the Queen of Hearts, the Tea Party, there's just so many things for the Gilmore Girls to refer to. Oh, and don't forget the Cheshire Cat Hotel from the road trip to Harvard. That is also a reference. Anyway, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland is about a young girl who falls down a rabbit hole and finds a magical world. And while it's fun, it does have themes. Some of them are about the confusion of growing up and the differences that exist between logic and things like imagination, which is also part of finding yourself and your identity. The only other thing I want to note here, besides the fact that, of course, it is a popular Disney adaptation, is that I prefer the Minalima graphic and interactive editions. I did link this one in the Substack post that accompanies this podcast. What these editions are, and they make them for a lot of classics as well as the Harry Potter books, is they're hardcover, they're the full text, but they are also illustrated and interactive. So there will be things like a map that you can pull out or a little toy that you can play with within the book. And it may sound childish, but I actually think it works really well for both kids and adults. I've done classic books like this and I absolutely adore the experience. And I think with a book that is as fantastical as this one, it is the perfect choice to try it. Next, we have Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman. This is at the bookstore in episode 516. And sadly, it's also at the funeral that is in winter on Gilmore Girls. I don't want to say whose funeral that is, just so I don't spoil it for anyone. But if you know, you know, and it definitely makes sense. And this is one book that I felt like I needed to have on my bookshelf to be a classic reader. Walt Whitman is from the Philadelphia area. We do have a Walt Whitman bridge here. And there's just something about this book that to me feels highbrow and like you've made it as a reader. This is a collection of poems that are about humans, nature, and how they're all interconnected. I did find a copy at my library sale last year, though I have not picked it up just yet. I think that if you like poets like Mary Oliver or nonfiction writers like Margaret Rankle, you will probably like this book. I think I will probably read it one poem a day over an extended period of time. Okay, so we also have to talk about Pride and Prejudice. I think you can read any one of Jane Austen's book and get that springy feel, but there's just something about the way the English countryside works in this book that makes it feel the most like spring to me. And you probably know that this is where we bear witness to the mistaken first impressions of Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy. It's really about what she thinks about him that is not correct once she gets to know him even deeper. They, of course, do fall in love. So Dean actually read it on Rory's request, and I think this is so nice of him. He did say he liked it. I'm sort of recalling Jess also saying he liked Jane Austen in that conversation where he was with Paris in the kitchen at Rory's house. Anyway, the way I want to recommend this book to you is on Audible. What I really like about Audible, I know a lot of people don't like to buy books from Amazon, and I totally get that, but Audible does have exclusive editions of the classics that are narrated by famous actors. Here we have Rosamund Pike, who starred in the Keira Knightley movie adaptation, which is my personal favorite. And there's just something about the way these famous actors narrate that it really brings the stories to life and makes them so much easier to consume. Another thing you could do is use the audiobook and listen to it as you read. I've done that many times before with classic books, and it really helps me stay focused and understand more of it. Okay, Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm by Kate Douglas Wiggin. Paris calls Rory this in episode 222. I have not read this book yet, but to me, it sounds like if you're a fan of Anne of Green Gables, then you would probably like it. Here we have an imaginative young girl who's sent from a crowded family home to live with her two very different aunts in a quiet village. She struggles to fit in, but her optimistic spirit wins them over. It sounds a lot like Anne of Green Gables, doesn't it? It's always a popular pick with readers in our book club, and I think it's for that reason. I think people read the description and think it sounds like Anne of Green Gables, and that is such a commonly read book that it feels familiar and it's likable. So it feels easy to pick this one up. But I will note that many readers have also reached out to me over the years and told me that there is some ickiness in it in a modern context. I don't totally recall the circumstances, but I think there is an older man who shows an interest in Rebecca that feels a little bit off. Take that for whatever you will. Another thing I do find interesting about this book, which is on my bookshelf and I will get to it, is that the author based it off of her life in New England, and I think that is a very nice Gilmore connection, as well as that there's a Shirley Temple adaptation of this book, which also feels like something Lorelai and Rory would totally watch on movie night. Another one for you to consider that definitely feels like spring is A Room with a View by E.M. Forster. You may recall that Lorelai and Rory watched the adaptation in episode 5.02. I believe this is right when Rory comes home from her trip with Emily to Europe. So this one is set in the countryside, like Pride and Prejudice, but it's both the English and Italian countryside. You'll find Florence in it, which was fun for me because I did go to Florence on my honeymoon. And it is a Victorian romance novel that is, shall I say, for refined readers. And why I say this is because if you watch The Office, you may recall it from the Finer Things Club, which was all about having a very civilized, highbrow kind of book club. We actually used to do this in my law firm in my early days of working there as a young attorney. Some of us younger attorneys would get together in one person's office for a little break, and he would put on classical music and we would have tea or something like that. I think it's super cute and fun. And if you are in the office today, I think it still tracks as something that you can do that makes reading the classics more fun. Anyway, what happens here is that Lucy is a young woman and she has to choose between convention and passion in her love life. It's short and it's easy, and there is a older but popular adaptation. This is the one that the Gilmore Girls watched. But I've got to say, I think this Victorian novel is very relatable today, which many of them are not. But I think in this particular context, things really haven't changed that much. There are still notions and ideas of things that we feel like we should do versus what we want to do as we're coming of age. And those things really can drive our decisions. It's so relatable, in fact, that Kevin Kwan, who wrote Crazy Rich Asians, wrote a very fabulous retelling. I believe it was set on Capri and New York in a very modern context. Again, that whole Rich Asians vibe, and it's called Sex and Vanity. So if you want, you can also do a book pairing with that. Next, we have Walden by Henry David Thoreau. This, to me, feels like a very Luke book, but Richard refers to it in episode 614, and Rory also says that their empty house looks like it in episode 7.1. So what happens in Walden is that Thoreau lives in Walden Pond in a cabin by himself, in nature, in solitude, and writes about it. I think that if you are in a place in your life where technology is really overwhelming you, or any of the other demands of modern life, then this one may be for you. I tried it a few years ago during the pandemic, and I did struggle with it. Maybe now that we're out of the pandemic, I may do better with it, and that it just wasn't the time to read a book about being alone. Okay, the last one I have for you that feels like spring from the Gilmore Girls reading list is The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame. I hope I said that right. Anyway, I think that my reading list is the only one that picked this one up, and I love that about my list. I worked really hard to get the most books for you and to get ones that no other list on the internet has. And Rory does refer to Mr. Toad in the fall episode of the reboot. This is a children's feel-good classic, and it's all about friendship between little animals, a mole, a rat, a badger, and of course the toad. And it's set along a peaceful English riverbank where they have little adventures like boating and picnicking. I think it's sounds absolutely delightful, especially if you get an illustrated edition, which I did link one for you in the Substack post that accompanies this. I think that it really can take you back to the way vintage books felt. Very simple and almost cottagecore as well. This one is at the top of my list. I'm going to try to find a copy at my library sale this month, but I also heard the audio is good, so I did put a hold on that at the library. Okay, so on my list of classic books that feel like spring, I did also add 3 books that were not on the Gilmore Girls reading list, but that I definitely think should be. So this is for people who are okay with going off the Gilmore Girls reading list for the Rory Gilmore reading challenge, which is totally fine. This challenge is totally up to you and how you want to tackle it. And the books I chose for that were Anne of Green Gables by L.M. Montgomery, Heidi by Joanna Spyri, and The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. All 3 of those would be great choices for spring. And again, those are not on the Gilmore Girls list, so this is just if you're okay with going off the list or if you want something that's classic in addition to what you're reading from the list this month. Okay, now let's talk about all the classic books on Gilmore Girls. Of course, there are hundreds. So I narrowed it down on my full Substack post for you to 101. I thought this was a pretty good number to give you something that's comprehensive while also not overwhelming. It's super subjective what makes a classic book. I personally started with a list of 475. Then I cut it down to about 160 that I consider to be classics, and then I started refining from there. I decided to cut out references to single poems, as well as books that were more iconic in pop culture than in literature. So for example, one that was hard for me to cut, but I did ultimately cut was Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. To me, yes, it is a classic, but it's more about what it means to pop culture than the words on the page per se. You may disagree with me, and that's totally fine. Again, I really think this is subjective. There's no right or wrong answer. And then I did also cut some less popular works by the most famous classic authors. So at first, I had left on all of Dickens, Shakespeare, Hemingway, even J.D. Salinger. But as I refined the list, I thought that as long as we have the most popular ones on there, that is truest to the definition to what a classic is for me. My goal ultimately is for you to walk away from this month feeling like you read one of the most essential classics. So if you want to stray from this list of 101 books, again, totally fine. This is just my essential list. Because reasonable minds do differ, I did start a thread on Substack to see how you define classic books. Here are some of the comments you left. We have themes that stand the test of time, books that you'll go back to over and over again. And I do like that one because there is a little bit of a subjective quality to it. Another person said it continues to speak to people long after the moment has passed. I think that is very true as well. They say something in it stays alive and each new reader feels that spark as if it were written for them. That's pretty lovely, isn't it? We have a few that say things like universal, long lasting, staying power. And I agree. Even when I think about what is classic in a modern context, what I'm looking for is what are the books that are staying. Another person looked at what remains popular for quite a few decades and that continues to be well loved and sparks conversation. Those are great comments. I love all of that input. So I'm not going to go through my entire list that I think are essential classics, but I did list them all in the Substack post, which I linked for you. And I'm going to just go through the list really quickly and give you some highlights to help you decide what to read and how to read it. One thing that I did differently here, I always do either a thumbs up, a thumbs down, or a heart to review the books so you know what I thought of the books that I read. This one, I also added a green light. And what the green light means, these are emojis I'm talking about, is that I thought it was relatively easy to read. I think one thing about classics is that people can get intimidated by them, and I don't want you to be intimidated. I want you to know there are a lot of books on this list that are not that hard to pick up. So as I scroll through, I'm going to just try to focus on the books that I gave hearts to at first. And I'll try to also focus on the easy ones. So even though this is probably one of the harder books on the list, Anna Karenina, I can't help but talk about. That is Rory Gilmore's favorite book. It was a love for me. It's 800 pages. I really enjoyed the Oprah's Book Club edition. It's an award-winning translation, and I also paired it with Spark Notes. I did only 10 pages a day. So yes, it did take me about 80 days to read, but I think this is a great way to conquer a big classic that feels intimidating. I absolutely adored the complexity of Anna Karenina and her love story. There are some parts, especially within the middle, that are very much about farming, and that kind of threw me for a little bit of a loop, but at at the end of the day, I did learn more about Russia during that time. So it was valuable to me, even though those weren't my favorite parts of the book. I think that of all the books I have read from this list because of the challenge, I'm most grateful for reading Anna Karenina. So take that for whatever you will. I just feel like I would not have done it otherwise. And it's a book that I keep going back to in my mind as the years pass. Of course, it's also nice to read Rory Gilmore's favorite book. Another one that is really beloved by me and many other members of this book club and got a green light for me is The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. This is about a young woman who is experiencing mental health issues at a certain time in the country. I think it was probably 1950s, 1960s. And she's also coming into her own in her career. I just found her voice to be so relatable to a young person. And I do think that stands the test of time. However, I will note that some people may find it triggering. Charlotte's Web, another great one for spring or summer. It has those feel-good themes of friendship and it takes place on a farm. This is just one of those children's books that both kids and adults will love, and really everyone who reads it loves it. Death of a Salesman, if you want a play, this one by Arthur Miller is a great one. I read it several times in school, and I think to this day, it has such a lasting impact because it really makes you think about what is the value of a life. And at the end of the day, we all want to feel like we had a life that was well lived and that we made a difference. And this book really explores that. I also love The Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank, another one that I've read many times, both in school and recently. I think she is so brilliant beyond her years. And gosh, I am just so grateful that we are able to experience her beautiful story and her beautiful words, though she herself did not make it through World War II. Frankenstein by Mary Shelley is a new favorite classic, and it was so much easier than I ever expected it to be. I think because it is sci-fi, I thought it was going to be really hard, given both that theme and it being an older classic, but no, it was really easy to read. It is super engaging, and it just shocks me how relevant it is to today as we move into an AI world where it's really warning you of what can happen when humans don't check their own ability to create something very powerful. The Glass Menagerie by Tennessee Williams. This is one of my favorite plays that I read from this list. Not everyone is going to like it because not a lot happens in it. It's sort of like a slice of life. But what I loved about it is that it's a memory play, and it brings in the theme of memory through so many different ways that I just find it so insightful and such a smartly written play. The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald is a book that I think everyone should read. In my opinion, this is the great American novel, and I think it's because of its focus on the American dream and what the American dream represents to our history. What I love about this one especially is that it's very heavy in symbolism. And it also has a few epic, really memorable lines in literature, including its famous last line. If you're going to read Shakespeare, I know it's not easy, but I would probably recommend either Hamlet, which is my personal favorite. To me, that book read like an episode of Dateline, or I would also recommend Romeo and Juliet. And the reason for that one is because I think most people know the general plot, so it would be easier to follow. And you can also pair it with the adaptation. My favorite was the Leonardo DiCaprio one from the mid-90s. I actually read it in school at the same time that movie came out. So this was one of my first really immersive literary experiences. And it really is a great adaptation. The only other thing I will say when it comes to Shakespeare is that I tried to buy these editions that are called No Fear. And I usually just find them at used bookstores or at my library sale. And what it is that on one side of the page, there is the Shakespearean text. And on the other side of the page, there is a modern English translation. So it makes it super easy to read. The Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka is another one that is really popular in our book club. It's short and it's easy. And I think that people like to pick it up because you do remember it from Gilmore Girls. It's the book that Rory bought for Dean when they were first dating, and she bought him a Christmas gift. And Lane was saying, why would you buy him that? That's like him buying you a football. Anyway, this is a story about a salesman who wakes up one day as a bug. Yes, that's right. He wakes up as a bug. And really the purpose is to show how that changes his life and how people relate to him. It's pretty interesting, and I think you can read it really quickly. Okay, we did talk about Pride and Prejudice and Jane Austen, and that you can read any of her books to really get that spring feeling. But I do want to talk about Northanger Abbey. This is the book that Rory reads in the gazebo, which I believe believe is right when Dean is getting married or has just gotten engaged. But anyway, what I love about this one is that it's written more like a YA book, and it's more about fun and imagination than anything else. So I think it's really a good starter into Jane Austen's books, even though her other ones are more popular. Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck, this is also a very popular book in our book club and with classic readers in general. It's short, it's easy, it's about friendship, and I really don't think you can go wrong with this one. Pygmalion by George Bernard Shaw is another play that you can read in probably about 2 hours. The original text wasn't my personal favorite, but what I love about reading this one this month, which is April, is that the adaptation is My Fair Lady starring Audrey Hepburn, and that is one of my all-time favorite adaptations. And it's also one of my favorite movies to watch in the spring. It just has so much eye candy, and a lot of that involves flowers. If you are a thriller reader, I would recommend Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. I think people will debate whether this is a classic or not, but I personally think it is. It's super atmospheric. This lower class woman very quickly meets and marries a man, and she moves into his grand estate known as Manderley, where the ghost of his wife lingers, mostly in the staff who are always talking about her. And this really causes her to question what actually happened to Rebecca. And of course, this will take you on a surprising ride. If you want something nonfiction, I would definitely recommend A Room of One's Own by Virginia Woolf. This feels so Rory coded. It's an essay about the things that women need in order to become famous authors like Shakespeare. And what she argues is that you need a room to write and money. I think it's really interesting, and you can compare it to Gilmore Girls A Year in the Life, where Rory starts writing. And I think we can also think about how this relates to today and who has the ability to write, because this is generally not a high income position, yet we know it's a really important one. Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut. I kind of think this one should be more popular than it is in our book club. It was one of my favorite books that I read in high school. It is very science fiction-y, and it takes place in World War II, but his work is super readable, and he weaves in lessons about life and death in war in ways that are not preachy, but really make a lot of sense. Another book that everyone should read is To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. This is probably my second choice for the Great American Novel. This one is about race and justice in the South, and it's told through the eyes of a young girl, which makes it so special. There's also a very beloved adaptation. It's older, but it's an absolute classic, and you can pair that with it. Again, if you want to be a well-read reader, I definitely think you should read To Kill a Mockingbird. So before we move on, I think it would be fun to also go through a few of the books on the list that I did not like. I think this is what makes it really juicy, and because these are older books, I don't believe these authors are still living, and I don't think I can hurt their feelings by saying I didn't like these books. And really, at the end of the day, for most of them, the issue is just that it was not my type of book. And you'll notice a lot of themes here. That generally means things like science fiction, heavy fantasy. I have Beowulf. That was a book that I hated in high school. I actually didn't like A Confederacy of Dunces. Even though this is a newer book and it's more popular, I thought it was really dense and hard to read. And I just didn't like the main character or really understand his story. Do I regret reading it? No. I'm glad I understand what it's about and why it's popular, but not one of my favorites. A Clockwork Orange, another one. I actually am not sure why my teachers chose this as required reading in high school, because it's kind of scandalous and out there. Not my kind of book. The Hobbit, I know many people will disagree with me on this, but these really heavy fantasy plot lines are just not my favorite thing. Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. This is one that I think many people will not enjoy picking up. It's about a scandalous relationship with a younger girl. Hard to appreciate in today's modern age. And here's one that some people agree with me and some people disagree with me. 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. I know many people who think of this as their favorite book of all time or one of their favorite books. I thought it was the hardest book I have ever read. And the reason is because it takes place over several generations and almost all of them have the same name. I slogged my way through it and I did finish it, but I found it to be incredibly difficult to read. Jess may disagree with me as well. This is one of his book choices. Shane is a Western, and again, just not my thing. I read this one in high school and was not into it. Okay, so now that you know the juice on the books that I did not like and why, I'm just going to share what I am reading this month, and it is The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. Why? I don't know. I simply took a look at my bookshelf, and that one stood out to me, and I thought, you know what? That one's been on my list for a long time. It's not too short. It's not too long. I'm going to pick it up right now. And I'm glad I did, because I have since heard that it is a very juicy and very unputdownable book. I did just start it, so I have the book, and then I also borrowed the audio from the library to read along with it. So I am very hopeful about that one. Okay, so I hope you are very well prepared to read classic books this month with us. Whether you choose something on my list, something off my list, something that's spring-like, something that is not seasonal, whether you read The Outsiders, which is our featured book of the month. I love that this is a challenging reading prompt, but there's also so much room for you to choose what you want within it to make it your best reading experience. And again, my whole goal for you is that at the end of the month, you feel like you have accomplished an essential classic read. If you need help picking, just head to the Substack post that is linked in the show notes, and let's talk about it. See you next time, Friday Night Readers.
Thanks so much for listening to Friday Night Readers. I love having you here in our little corner of the Gilmore Girls world. If you'd like even more feel-good fun, then upgrade to a free or paid email subscription membership at FridayNightReaders.substack.com. Paid members get exclusive extras. You'll also unlock members-only posts, as well as full community access to our chats. It's the coziest virtual place like Stars Hollow, and your support helps keep this podcast going strong. Lastly, if you enjoyed today's episode, please take a minute to rate and review the show. It helps other Gilmore fans find us, which helps me provide you with more content like this. Until next time, life's short, read fast,